FM News Talk 97.1 podcast.
Sounds good this morning.
It does. A little warm, but
very warm.
But it's at least it's not raining or nasty outside.
It's awfully pretty through the windows.
Looks like it's going to be a nice day. Welcome back, folks. It's Eye on Health every Saturday from 10 to 11 here on 97.1 FM News Talk. We're talking about your health care. My name is Michael Jones. I got Eric Robert over there.
How you doing, Doc?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Excited about the show today.
I'm always my favorite guest is on.
This is a 2 for 2. Last week we had Dr. Harvey on.
Oh yeah, I mean this is like
right. We haven't worked basically now for 2 weeks, right. Dr. Ojile, because last week Dr. Harvey comes on. He just lays the whole show out for us. It's easy, and then of course you come on and the show brings itself together.
We have had some heavy hitters on.
We have,
which is good.
Yeah, and more to come.
It's like having 2 cleanup hitters.
That's right.
We're just bench warmers.
I don't get these sports analogies, but I believe.
Oh, you don't?
Yeah.
But it's like we're just sitting on the bench, maybe standing and spitting sunflower seeds.
That's right, yeah.
And Steve Harvey and Dr. Ojile come in.
They're out there.
They're hitting home runs.
That's right.
But you know what? We all get a World Series ring.
That's right.
Did you know that, Eric?
That's how it works.
Did you know that?
I'll take it.
You'll take it.
I didn't even know I played baseball.
You'll take it. You'll probably sell it, and then you'll put the money into the stock market. Knowing
Absolutely.
You.
Yeah, for the long term. You kidding me?
All right. Hey, we got a show to do.
We do.
And we've got a very special guest.
We do.
His name is Dr. Joe Ojile.
Glad to be here with you guys.
From Clayton Sleep Institute. What's the website?
ClaytonSleep.com.
Yeah, fantastic website. It's got all the information on there. Also, you can find information about Dr. Ojile on our website.
EyeOnHealthRadio.com.
We'll put it on there after the show, and everything should get updated, and you can link right to his website from ours.
By the way, big update for listeners. So, of course, we always talk about where you can find previous shows and this show after it airs. Of course, EyeOnHealthRadio.com. It's up there right away. You'll be able to find the podcast, 971talk.com. But we have a new place to tell listeners to go. Did you know that, Dr. Jones?
No, I mean, this is a surprise to me.
Radio.com.
Hey,
we are live streaming on radio.com. Oh, by the way, that's the only place you can find us live streaming. That's so if you're used to using another app, radio.com is what you need to go get, and that's where you can also find previous episodes of the show.
Man, I'm learning something.
There you go.
I didn't even know there was such a thing as
radio.com. You can live stream it anywhere.
That's right.
Anywhere at all.
Anywhere you want to be.
That's the magic of the internets.
Yep.
Right?
That's right. So, great resource. Go check it out.
Very good. And, hey, by the way, if you're looking up shows, like old shows, of course you want to look up Dr. Ojile's old appearances. And by the way, I think Dr. Ojile was our last guest in the old studio.
That's the case, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
And this is his first appearance at the new studio.
But he had actually seen the new studio before we had seen it because he had cut some commercials. Right?
It's amazing how different Dr. Ojile looks with daylight.
Yeah, right.
It's just it's a whole different experience.
Or let me press the mute
button. Just to update our listeners, Dr. Ojile is a pulmonologist, but specializes in sleep disorder.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And not just well known in the St. Louis area, nationally recognized all over the place. And you are on, what is the Sleep Academy? What's the
National Sleep Foundation?
National Sleep Foundation. And he always has great information because sleep affects so much of what we do. Like everything, right?
It does. It's like it's a separate organ system.
It is. You wonder at some point, will they start classifying it as an organ system?
So I think our approach would be that it should be considered as, we would call it a meta system, a system of systems. If you think about it, we talk about the brain, right? At least the brain, we sort of identify the brain as being up in our cranium, but sleep's sort of like that in that it affects everything, every other organ system, but it's not something you can touch and feel, so it's more difficult. Only now are people starting to get a sense that it's its own beast.
And what's always interesting to me is when I was doing my training, which was not that long ago, Eric.
Really?
No, it was not. I'm not that old.
All right.
So we're not talking that long ago. I mean, you're talking late 90s. At the time, sleep, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is the impression that I got while I was doing my training. It was almost a mystical thing. It wasn't. There was no hard science. It was not pushed as a separate organ system. We maybe spent a day on it, maybe at that.
1 hour in 4 years.
Yeah,
that's the number.
And since then, especially as I've come to know you, you start to appreciate it a lot more. But it also seems like in just the general consciousness, there's more awareness. Is that right?
I think you're completely correct about that. And you're seeing it through efforts of people like you and Eric, but also...
let's take credit for that.
Yeah, I got it. I just put it in my resume, actually.
Should we get the Nobel Peace Prize for that?
Something like that, yeah.
Something. We should.
Is there a
We should
Nobel
get
Prize in
something.
medicine?
Well, I'll
There
nominate
is.
you guys.
Oh, hey,
There you go. Perfect.
I mean, we'll leave you out of it, Dr. Ojile, because we're just taking...
Mentioning the acceptance
We're
speech.
taking credit for what you're doing. But yes, sure. Okay, right. So it's because of me and Eric. What now?
But also, as you see, yes, besides you guys,
Okay, all right.
in small addition to you, I think what you've seen, two things. One, it's been better appreciated amongst healthcare people, but also it's starting to get more into one big thing is performance. So you're seeing it with especially the Olympic athletes and professional athletes. You're starting to see them incorporate this into their, not only are they doing it as they work out, they're talking about it. And when they start to talk about those things, there are certain things that in our culture, high performance individuals can start to influence those of us that aren't in those high performance industries. And so we're seeing that with things like even Tom Brady focusing on sleep and crediting his longevity partially to his incorporation of that strategy in his late 20s when he decided, when you listen to him talk, he made a conscious decision to lengthen his career by focusing on several key metrics as it relates to his health, and sleep was one of those he identified.
He would be considered an early adopter.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Exactly.
Because that would go back about 20 years. Because there's an interesting fact that only I know and Eric knows. Tom Brady and myself, we share something.
Yes.
Our exact date of birth. We were born on the same day, same year.
Hospital, same room, right? It was a separation at birth thing. I thought that was...
There may have been a mix-up there, right?
Yeah.
The royalty checks are still coming.
Yeah, I wish. So that would have been 20 years ago that he's adopting these things. Way an early adopter, right? I mean, that's...
that was way ahead of the curve.
Way ahead of the curve. And then you look at him and it's like, yeah, that makes sense, right?
And look at it. His performance is still... And Michael Phelps also was an early adopter. So there's been several individuals like that have come out and started to say, hey, look, we need to do this. And if you're training, it's a good thing for you to do as part of your own fitness regimen.
I know we're coming up against a break here, but let me throw this question at you real quick before we go to break. What about these people on shift work? I mean, that has got to that has got to affect their performance if they've been up all night on these shifts. Is there any research behind these unfortunate people that have to work these overnight shifts?
So shift work's one of the most difficult things for folks to do. First of all, we live in a 24/7 society, so there are people intrinsically that are going to have to work these shifts. One of the key things, and this has been a relatively slow adoption, unlike early adoption, is to try to incorporate some sleep principles into the shift work programs. I would have to say that we are still lagging on that. So some of this is trying to get the individuals to use some good strategies to protect the sleep time they have. This is the one population we sometimes teach napping strategies to. People who work night shift especially are probably some of the most sleep-deprived people in our society. So we have to really work with them. Straight night shift workers do have increase in certain health consequences like heart disease and cancer. But again, in our society, somebody's got to
do it.
The one thing that's encouraging that we're starting to see people do, some of this is on their own, is they're choosing to work nights if their biology favors nights. Meaning, and we've talked before, there's people that are larks and people that are owls. Larks like to be awake early. Owls like to be awake at night. People that have owl-type physiology, some of them are starting to say, well, you know what? I like being up at night.
Might as well take the shift.
Exactly.
Right. All right, folks, we got to go to break to pay some bills. When we come back, we're going to have more with Dr. Joe Ojile from Clayton Sleep Institute. Check out his website while we're on break, claytonsleep.com. And stay tuned for more Eye on Health after these words. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Okay, well, how is that song?
I guess I should go to sleep. You were talking whenever that happened.
Oh, I
it was the first line.
I missed that part. Well, welcome back to Eye on Health. My name is Michael Jones. I got Eric Robert running the board over there every Saturday. We're talking about your health care. In particular, today, we're talking about your sleep health, which affects all of your health care, with Dr. Joe Ojile from Clayton Sleep Institute. Check out his website at claytonsleep.com because all of this information is on there. It's fantastic. Now, I got an interesting email the other day. You got it, too, because I saw you on there.
Okay.
And I just pulled it up. I wasn't surfing the net when you were.
Sure.
I was looking at this email. And it's from the Journal of the National Sleep Foundation.
All right.
And it's got you all over it. Right? The June edition. So what is in there? What is that article talking about?
Is it the letter?
Yes.
So basically, it's the end of my year of being chairman of the National Sleep Foundation, being privileged to serve in that role.
That went quick.
It did go quick, didn't it?
Yeah.
And so it was a summation of some of the things that have been going on, and the privilege of, and thanking people for the privilege of working with the wonderful professionals around the country. But talking a little bit, one subject we talked about was how we have a Blue Ribbon Committee that's published the first set of guidelines for how to start looking at all the mobile technology. So one of the real issues right now, as you all have seen, and I suspect your listeners, is that the mobile technologies out there are almost all including some form of sleep component. Monitoring your sleep, whether it's your iPhone, your Fitbits, very exciting stuff. And it indicates that there is, as you were indicating in your opening monologue, this groundswell of interest in sleep as part of your health program. We don't really know where it fits, but we know it should be in there somewhere. And so the industry itself, the computer electronics people, have come and said, we need some organization to start to set down some sort of set of collaborative standards that we can use as we build these technologies. And luckily, the chairman that was prior to me, Dr. Max Hershkowitz, who's a wonderful, wonderful scientist, just recently retired, but still doing this one project, and had background in electrical engineering, actually an MIT graduate in electrical engineering. So he chaired an entire committee of experts, and they've been working with the computer technology people. And so that was just published in this last year. It's a first iteration. Now they can go out and comment on it and start to work on it. I don't believe it's binding necessarily, but it's a place to begin the dialogue because patients are coming in, and I suspect you have something similar in the ophthalmologic field, but they're coming in and saying, well, look at my Fitbit, doc, look at this, look at that. I'm not getting enough REM sleep, or I'm having all these disruptions. And we want to very carefully say, we're so glad that you're interested in your sleep, but let's not overly focus on that. Let's start talking about your sleep health and get some documentary evidence because that's not standardized or validated yet.
Yeah, you don't know how good the app is that they're using, right?
Exactly.
I would equate it to the step counters, which have become ubiquitous. And even, I don't know if you're aware of it, you have your phone in your pocket and you walk around all day. It's basically tracking your steps. That has become an important part of your health monitoring, just so you can see what your basic level of physical activity is. There's a lot of these apps out there that are quote-unquote sleep trackers, but to get to your point, you don't really know how good that particular app is. It could be crap.
Exactly.
Eric, it could be a crap app.
That's trademarkable, I think.
There probably is an app that tracks going to the bathroom called the crap app.
I'm sure. Yeah.
We could call this the CPAP app.
Yeah, the CPAP app. Right.
The CPAP app.
But you just don't know, right? I mean, you don't know how good it is. And you're saying patients. I've even emailed you and said, hey, I got this app here, and it told me I was terrible at sleeping, right? I mean, but at least it does start the conversation.
And there is some baseline data that's helpful. So frequently people who do come in and say, I've noticed on my app that my sleep is disrupted, begins the conversation. Many of those individuals do have an issue. And so that's the entree point, right? It's like 20 years ago when people used to go to a health fair, they stuck their finger and they got a cholesterol and they said, oh my, your cholesterol's quite elevated. You should go see your doctor. We want to look at these things as positives because this is a chance to get the public engaged in improving their overall performance. The thing with these apps is they're the first step, but the call to action isn't as clear, right? With the steps, it's very cool, right? The call to action is, wow, I noticed I'm walking 2 miles a day, but maybe I should be walking 4. So there's a better call to action, where with the sleep issue, we're still trying to work through what's going to be the call to action to our patients. Besides, I noticed I'm not sleeping. The app says I'm sleeping poorly, right?
And the fix is, in my opinion, the fix isn't as easy,
Correct.
right? I mean, if it was easy to get more sleep, I would do it.
Right. Exactly. That's the point. You're right on mark as usual. So the issue is the call to action is a little more complicated, because now you have to have a conversation with somebody in the field to figure out which path are you going down. Do you have a mechanical problem like sleep apnea? Do you have a biological problem going on, something that's affecting sleep? Or do you have a problem that's really behavioral and we need to address that? And there's more options besides those, but those are the sort of dialogues.
And you got to look at all that, right?
Exactly.
That's what you do as the sleep specialist. You look at all that, especially the behavior, because those are easily modifiable.
Correct. They are. They're work, but they're easily modifiable.
Don't
you got
use your phone and all of that. So these mobile devices, and that gets to another point. The mobile devices are great for increasing awareness of sleep problems, but they themselves are a big problem.
They're
huge problem.
They're a huge problem. They're a double problem, right? So you have the problem where the devices themselves can be stimulating. So you've got the blue light, which we've talked about many times, which you've had some interesting input on the blue light blocking of some of the implants that you've seen put in over the years. That's number one. Number two, you have the stimulation effect. Lastly, there are people who can be so overly focused on the monitoring device, they become disrupted from that. And that's an issue, right? Because we have to also sometimes tell people, let's try these interventions. But by the way, don't overly watch your device.
Pretend like we're not watching these
exactly.
Right. I mean, because otherwise you're worried about it. What is there more sleep problem now than there was 50 years ago, or are we just more aware of it now than we were 50 years ago?
I would tell you that it's both. There's two things. One, we are clearly more aware. 50 years ago, sleep was embryonic in its state. The other part is, though, given what's going on in our society, with all the technology and all the advancements, we're having the problems of progress. I don't think people are going to say that having, a smartphone necessarily is a step backward in our evolution or our society. There are people that could maybe have that argument, but I think overall we're making things better in the world. But these things do carry with them disruptions that we didn't have back in the older days before you had cell phones. I mean, think about long before our time, but before there were even house phones, before there was electricity. We now know through some of the literature, there's good solid evidence that back before we had electricity, they used to have what was called first and second sleeps. That most people used to sleep in a biphasic, not a monophasic methodology. So if you go to Shakespeare and things like that, they talk about having first sleep and second sleep.
When would these be during the day?
So it'd be during the night. People would wake up middle of the night, maybe have as a family, have a conversation, have a snack, and go back and sleep. It's described in the literature repetitively. And
so it sounds like having little children.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
It's basically the same thing.
It probably evolved from that, right? Because back then you're out on the prairie or you're in some little village in United Kingdom in England, and they woke up in the middle of the night and they had candles, and the kids got up. Maybe they had a little snack. You fed them. You and your wife had a
We
conversation,
try
and then
and keep
people
the
went back
fire
to
out
sleep.
of it.
Yeah,
it backfired really bad one time. So candles at a minimum.
So I mean, that's a very interesting.
Yeah.
So
and you just wonder evolutionarily, if that's a word, what's better for us? What were we supposed to do?
That is,
right?
Isn't that an interesting question?
All right, we got to go to break. Stay tuned. We're going to have more Eye on Health after these words. All right. Welcome back.
You know what it is? It's coming up next.
Okay.
Oh, actually, it's a little bit later. You can go ahead and start the show now.
All right. I'm waiting.
It's Sleep Now in the Fire by Rage Against the Machine.
Oh, Sleep Now in the Fire.
Might be how
Better
your
turn this
shoulder
off.
feels.
I think there's going to be some curse words coming up here.
No, I got the right version.
Hey, folks, welcome back. It's Eye on Health every Saturday from 10 to 11. We're talking about your health. You can find old episodes on eyeonhealthradio.com. You can also see links to our guest today, Dr. Joe Ojile from Clayton Sleep Institute. Thanks for coming back on. We always
Thanks for
appreciate
having me.
your expertise. off air, of course, we always have more interesting conversations
It's
off
the
air.
most difficult producer's job. Like, get these guys back on the air. They're having so much fun off the air talking. We need to be able to record that.
Well, there's just so much good information. You simply can't fit it in an hour, so it makes it tough. But what you're telling us is that these apps that are out there to give us some basic tracking of our sleep are good in a way because they make our awareness of sleep problems better.
Yes.
But in some ways, it makes it hard for you as a clinician because they're not standardized and you don't even know how good they are. They could really not tell you anything. They could give you misinformation, right?
Exactly.
Because they're not regulated. They're just put on the App Store.
Well, there is no regulatory or oversight. You're exactly right.
So I know at some of the developer conferences for like Apple and Google this year, they're talking about putting more parental guidance features on phones to help limit kids, I guess, activities. And I'm assuming part of that will be time limits that a parent could put in. As a sleep specialist, you've got to think that that's a great step forward, right?
I do. I didn't totally understand it the way you explained it, but if they proceed with that sort of method, then you could see where folks like myself, you, and Eric could begin to say, okay, look, you're not going to use your phone after 8 o'clock. And we could start to have that because it's very difficult, short of taking the phones completely, which we sometimes have to do, to do that. But if there's ways to start locking them out, just like the blue light thing that automatically goes on, or off, so to speak, that it would be a helpful development. And what's exciting to me is that their conversations are happening at the developer level, which means that this has risen to the point. I was talking to one of our esteemed colleague out on the East Coast yesterday on something, and he was telling me that at our meetings, they were having a lot of the sleep meetings in June. There were quite a few meetings with these electronics developers, and most of the big mobile platform companies have now put sleep experts on their staffs to start to advise them. So this is exciting. It's like putting a cardiologist or an eye doctor. You're starting to raise the level of awareness, and make no bones about it. Our friends and colleagues who are in these industries can really drive change.
Well, we've talked before about whenever Apple came out with Do Not Disturb, and that was a big thing, and other companies have followed suit. Now, I know you guys have a lot of free time, so you probably watch Apple's developer conference every year, as I do.
No comment.
But I actually just installed yesterday the new iOS 12 beta.
Okay.
And they have some new features in here that are very similar called screen time. They added features to Do Not Disturb.
Okay.
And then now not only does it track your screen time, but then for your kids' devices, you can put downtime on them where they literally shut off after a certain period. You can only authorize certain apps to work. Limits on different apps in terms of time limits, and special content blocking and privacy restrictions that are really interesting and useful if you're trying to manage that amount of screen time. And I got to tell you, this is what we do at home. Although these features weren't built into the operating system, then we used the Circle device, which we talked about on the air before. And it works great because what happens is, especially if you have creative kids, once you get the screens out of their way, they just open up. The books come out, the crayons come out. Now, they might hit your walls sometimes. You got to watch for that. But it's such a better way to develop them.
And how do you get this app, Eric?
This is built into iOS. So in September or so, whenever your phone updates with the public release, this is the beta version that I have on here, everybody's iPhone will have that.
It's amazing how quick that happened because it was at just the last developers conference, not the one that just happened, but the last one. They talked about screen time.
Yep.
And then there it is. It shows up in your operating system. Yeah.
Right. And Apple's been messaging this in their media and PR. So the good news is typically when Apple moves forward in a health segment like this, the rest of the industry follows in pretty quickly afterwards. So I think it's a huge development, and it's great to see that happen.
I mean, these kids, I know we've done whole shows on this, but they sleep with their phones. Instead of a teddy bear, they sleep with the phone. I have witnessed it with my own eyes.
Yeah, they do. And then,
like, what do you think is going to happen?
And if they don't turn it off, every thing that comes into their inbox will be a stimulus that will arouse them. And an interesting thing, when you get someone in the sleep lab, and over half our tests now are done at home, so we don't have the same view. But when we have someone in the sleep laboratory and we're monitoring their brain waves, these sort of stimuli it causes an irritation in the brain waves. Even if the person doesn't wake up, you can see the spike on their EEG or their brainwave.
Crazy.
So if a truck rumbles by, we all know that if you're at home and there's a loud noise outside, but if there's stimuli in your bedroom, there are many people who with extremely minor stimuli will have an arousal or an irritation in their brain tracings. Now, what effect does that have long term? It's not clear, but it's certainly an effect.
Yeah.
And when you see young people who are getting their text messages are pinging them all night long, because I don't know who's sending the text messages.
That's nuts.
Well, there's an acute stress effect to it as well, because depending on the content of those messages, that may or may not be stressful in of itself. Obviously, it disrupts sleep, but there's something that there was a very real point. And it happened shortly after. I'm obviously the youngest guy here in the room, but when I was a kid, you had the chance to be a kid, be outside, explore the world, and do those things. And the world is in devices today for a lot of kids. They don't recognize the richness of what's around them, and there's going to be a societal impact for that.
90% of their societal relationships are digital.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And there's a stress to answer those text messages. And I've had conversations with my kids, and they're like, I'm so stressed out because I have to I check people back on Snapchat. I have to do it like right away. I'm like, you're stressed out about that.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
What about your exams?
Well, wait a minute.
But you see that extend into adulthood as well, with constant connectivity in the professional space. Where do you guys deal with this all the time, right? Your doctor's on call. It's the ability to have space away from that to rest and get real, not just sleep, but just clear your mind.
Well, we have been trained and conditioned, unfortunately, to be able to answer those things, and somebody's going to have to do it. But not everyone should have to do it, right?
Right, and then not 24/7. We also have a sort of a distillation, right? We have a bit of a buffer. So if you want to use medicine as a sort of a model, right? There was buffers built for Dr. Jones as a surgeon, myself with what I've done in lung work and sleep work, where to get to the point where you get a stimulus, a call, or have to go for an emergency surgery, there is several things that have to occur before that happens. So it's not unrestricted stimulation, which with these text messages with young people or even all people, it's completely unrestricted.
Right.
There's just constant stimulus coming, right?
And when you say several things, you're meaning there's a process that by the time it gets to you, it's serious and it needs to get to you.
Exactly. Everything else has been checked.
And things like on-call hours and where there's a team approach to some of those things as well makes a difference, although I imagine that that doesn't necessarily mean you're off when you're not on call.
Right.
No, right.
But I mean, for us, like when a nurse in the hospital calls you, a colleague, a professional colleague like a nurse, there's usually something. You better have your antennas up. Those nurses are highly trained. They're professional. They're calling you with a problem.
Right.
And doggone it, we're going to listen to what they have to say. It's not just a random stimulus.
Right.
And so,
and
the same with Dr. Jones.
Yeah. If you look at the text messages, though, that come in, it is just random.
Yeah.
It's the one kid who, for whatever reason, he's up all night and he just feels like he's got to text everyone. And there's no buffer there, right? So that is going to impact society. And you're talking about, you said off air, we're getting on average an hour less sleep today than we did in the 60s.
At least.
What is that going to be 15 years from now?
It's still diminishing. You're seeing, and you're seeing it in our country. One interesting study that I think is very telling, right, is that when you go to societies, the one study was done in Spain a few years ago, that back in those cultures, they had siesta, and siesta was very sleep biology oriented. Even though they didn't know necessarily the facts and data, they knew that you needed a nap in the middle of the day. So their society was set around that. They worked around where they lived so they could go home and take a siesta. With the suburbanization of those societies happening in the last 10 to 15 years, they kind of caught up with us in many regards in that way. They still live that lifestyle, but they don't have anywhere to go home and take a nap. So the stores close, everything shuts down, but the people are sort of just jettisoned out to meander around for an hour or two and yet they're still staying up late. I mean, you've been in Spain. They don't start even. You're like the blue light special at 10 p.m. So they're eating dinner at 10, 11, midnight, 1 in the morning, and then everything kind of starts up again at 9 in the morning. So they're compressing their sleep opportunities, and as such, this was about 10 years ago. That Spain was the most sleep deprived country, and not because anybody really were seeking that as a goal, but because their culture and then the developments of their society had not moved in concert together.
Yeah.
Could we see that sort of thing in our country? And I would say to you, we probably are.
So what is the average sleep for an American? What is it? 8 hours?
So for our age, and there's one, if you go to sleep.org or sleepfoundation.org, the group, the Blue Ribbon panel of specialists from all fields that was put together, the range for people, middle-aged people, so people over the age of their mid-20s up until 60 to 70, is about 7.5 to 9 hours, looking at all the literature, the peer-reviewed literature.
So the average is still okay.
Of what people need.
Oh, no,
not
what are we
necessarily
getting? What are we getting?
What are we getting? It's below 7 hours.
So we're getting below
we
what
are
we
sleep
need.
deprived. Yes, sir. Yeah.
And you just wonder what role that chronic sleep deprivation is playing in the obesity epidemic, the diabetes epidemic.
Well, and how about irritability, depression, road rage? I mean, we know when we're sleep deprived, these things, all these things, all these sort of behavioral issues. One issue we've tried to raise over the years with some of our corporate colleagues and patients is that, it really necessarily isn't a badge of either insight or courage or honor, a badge of honor to travel across 6 to 12 time zones, land, go straight to work, and make a decision on a corporate merger or war and peace or things like that, because you're intrinsically both sleep deprived and you're out of sync with your circadian rhythm. You have jet lag. So shouldn't we incorporate some of these scientific principles before two corporate titans decide to merge or close a factory when maybe they're not in their best mind?
I've seen it happen. I mean, it's like
here's a scarier thing though.
Yeah.
2 countries making a decision.
Sure.
Right?
Can't think of any recent examples.
No, there was a recent example, and if Trump got in an entire day before the whole thing. Yeah. Right? And then also another political example, not to touch the third rail here, but when Dr. Ronnie Jackson was submitted to be the VA head and there were claims that he was giving drugs out, a lot of what he was doing was giving sleep aids to people after crossing 6 or 12 time zones because he wanted those Secret Service agents to be, they call them icy, or they want them to be awake and aware. So he had to somehow supplement them. And then
it's real interesting. This is to give you a historical issue. I was with a book author out east at a project we're involved in. The book author gave me permission to use this. Is this gentleman did spent a year of his life writing a book about, if you remember the movie Gandhi, about the clash between the two cultures when the country separated, Pakistan and India. And then, of course, that was a great human tragedy. The two leaders had thought they had something worked out just before all this happened. The author has this in his book, and we talked about it, and he thought it was very interesting an observation because we had this dialogue. When you looked at the record, those two leaders had only slept a few hours a night, several nights in a row, and when they got to the end, there were just a couple things that came up, as it does in all these sorts of negotiations, and these leaders had worked so hard for peace, and at the end they had a little kind of minor disagreement, evidently, and one wonders, and the author wondered it after we talked, were they so sleep deprived that they were not capable of making the judgments they had been making, and inadvertently led their two countries into war and slaughter?
Yeah.
I mean, that's powerful stuff to think about.
Got to get your sleep, no doubt.
Or else you could start a world war.
You could start a war. All right, folks, stay tuned. We'll go to break.
These are two well-prepared individuals.
We're going to come back with more Eye on Health after these words. All right. I got that one.
Yeah.
No sleep till Brooklyn.
Got it. That's not the word that you thought it was.
All right. Welcome back, folks. Eye on Health. Eric's trying to get us in trouble.
No.
All right.
There is an explicit
The
song right
listeners
after
should
this
know
one,
how
though.
prepared you two are. You guys are so prepared.
The amount of
yeah.
show prep that goes into this show,
Unbelievable.
it really is.
Yeah, I mean, we had to
That's the
sleep
word
on this
for
one
it.
all week.
We did. Oh,
Yeah.
I see what you did there.
I do want to let you guys know that I found a wine called Sleeper.
Okay.
All right.
Does it got extra medicine in it?
I don't know.
Now,
but
do you drive a sleeper car? You know, it's like a hot rod, but it's actually, a Mercury Grand Marquis or something that you're peeling off from the stoplight.
I have to tell you, I don't.
No,
That's
okay.
a great. Where you came up with that?
You should. Hey, I got a question for you, and I know you've answered this before. What good does it do to just like with a sleeper wine? Good does it do to throw yourself a Mickey and make yourself pass out medically? Do you get a deep sleep if you're drugging yourself to get there?
So a couple things. Let's define, because you talked about alcohol and a Mickey, right? So let's talk about if you're doing it on your own. And I know you, as a clinician, you'll really get. You've seen this, I'm sure. I mean, we have people that have come in after years of doing that. A couple things. Is certainly things like alcohol and over-the-counter things, but alcohol especially, it will sedate you, at least for a while. The problem with it is twofold. One, the sleep is not normal. Two, after about 4 hours, alcohol becomes neurotoxic. It irritates your brain, which is why when you drink too much, not that we've ever done that, but I've heard when people
I don't know
do
what
that,
you're talking about.
they wake up early and they're like, why am I up? I don't want to be up. I just went to bed, right? It's because the alcohol is now irritating the cortex and waking you up. So that's number one. Number two, to continue to get the sedative effect, you have to dose escalate it. What do I mean by that? That's why we have people who come in and are say they're drinking 6, 10, 12. I had an individual come in who was drinking 18 beers a night to get to sleep. So it's if you have a sleep problem, the thing is not to do that, but to come and see your primary care doctor.
Sure.
And if they can't figure it out, we lead on those people who if they feel they need that, then we want to work first on behavior. And then some of our listeners and friends and colleagues, they have situational things. We need just to help them with a short-term medication of one variety or another because they're going through some life crisis, which we all have in our lives at times, and they just need help.
So that makes sense. What about long-term medicine? Every night you got to take this to go to bed, whether it's Xanax or whatever. I don't know what you use for it, but something like that.
So if the two things, one, our view is this, before we go there, we want to make sure the behaviors are tight. So we've really worked on some of the things we've implied about here today, that you're getting to bed on time, getting up on time, you don't have these nighttime stimulants. What we don't want to do is cover up behavior that's not good with medication. Those are frequently the patients who come in and say, I've tried this medicine, that medicine, the other. They all, quote, stop working, unquote.
Yeah.
It's frequently because the behaviors are not tightened up. So we work on that first. We call leading with behavior. The other thing we want to look for is, and again, part of this is removing the stigma from so many of these things, from sleep issues, but there's things like anxiety and depression that frequently can be tied in with sleep. It might be causing the sleep problem. It's our chance in a very sensitive way to tease that out of our patients and help them get help for the real underlying issue. And sometimes it just takes some active listening and sensitivity to get people to that place. So covering that up with sleep medication also isn't desirable. And that's where we have to work very closely with our primary care colleagues and our psychiatry colleagues.
If you take a sleep medicine, does it affect your sleep pattern, your brain waves and all that? Can you still go through all the normal stages of sleep?
You do. With the current medications, things...
What do they give? I mean, what's a typical medicine?
Yeah, the most common sleep medications that are utilized today are certainly things like Zolpidem, which the trademark's Ambien, Zaloplan, which is Sonata, and Zopiclone, which is Lunesta. Those are the three of the most common.
They're specifically to help get you to sleep.
Yes, sir, they are.
And you'll enter a normal cycle.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people out there that are on things like Xanax to get to sleep.
So again, in the right setting, under a doctor's supervision and done correctly, that may be the appropriate thing.
Can you enter the normal brainwave patterns if you take something like a Xanax?
So they are the patterns are subtly different on drugs like the benzodiazepines, but there's no evidence that the sleep is non-refreshing. So the rub there is listening and talking to the patient in a very sensitive way. There's a newer medicine now called, the trade name is Balsamra, and what it does,
there's vinaigrette with that.
It's not an hors d'oeuvre. So the Balsamra is the trade name. It is a drug. When people have narcolepsy, they're missing a protein in their brain fluid, and this drug, interestingly, blocks the receptor for that protein, so it makes you sleepy. Because, of course, narcoleptics are sleepy. And the interesting thing about it is good for both getting you to sleep and keeping you asleep. And it's quite safe in elderly folks. So it's one of the new preferred medications. It's the only drug right now that's been released in that class of medication.
Wow.
So that's new in the last year or two. We haven't probably talked about it before.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Ojile, for all the great information.
Thank
Again,
you.
we really appreciate it. Check out his website, folks, claytonsleep.com. Stay tuned for something that will not put you to sleep, talking about the stock market.
That's right.
With Bob Stockdale and On the Money. And we'll talk to you next weekend.
Get more at 971talk.com.